please welcome back to the stage the Atlantic's Margaret Lowe.
Thank you all. You came back. I'm so glad. I hope you enjoyed lunch, the breakout sessions, and one another. We have a pretty power-packed afternoon. We're going to look at education in America, traditional forms like four-year colleges and less conventional ones like coding and IT programs. Ask the question, how are students, young and old, getting trained for the jobs of the future? We'll also hear from two company founders, and we'll examine the question, who will the winners be in the age of AI? So let's jump right in with the question, is a four-year degree still worth it? We're putting that question to Carol Folt. She is the Chancellor of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Welcome. And she's here. And she is here with my colleague, Atlantic staff writer, Adam Harris. Adam, take it away.
Thanks. So I guess let's start with kind of the obvious question. How do you respond to that question? Is a four-year degree still worth it?
Well, first I want to say hi to everybody. It's great to be here. I was looking at all the different conversations you're having, and I think they're really relevant, and so you went right to the heart of it with the first question. You know, when people say that to me, my answer is that I think it's more worthwhile now than it's ever been. And I think that's really important that I explain why that is the case, but there are many ways we could do it. We could look at the economic value. Even in the state of North Carolina, students with degrees in not have completely different futures, economic futures. We can look at happiness. We can look at debt. All these things really scale with a college degree. That said, that we do still need to make changes in the degrees that we offer that continue to demonstrate their relevance and their utility. But I think the most important part of it is that even looking at projections for jobs in the next decade, the majority of the well-paying jobs are up higher in the technology sector. They're in areas that have not yet been discovered. So training for today is not the same as preparing for tomorrow. And that's what we have to have our universities and colleges ready to do, get people for the workforce that doesn't even exist yet.
Yeah, so and kind of along the lines of there need to be changes that are made. What are some of those fundamental changes that need to be made to higher education to kind of prepare students for the workforce of 2030, 2040, 2050?
Well, I think the first thing we have to remember is it isn't a single sector. Higher ed is not one thing. It is many things, and it's the combination of pathways towards education, training, synthetic thinking, critical thinking that are important. And so I think some of the big changes that we're already seeing is that we're learning more about how we deliver an education so that it can reach not only students in a residential college, but how can we do transformation that reaches out into the communities? How can we take students that are starting in a community college, maybe developing a skill set there, and get them into the four-year universities and into the graduate degrees that prepare them for those sectors? I think we're seeing a big change in most of the I'm talking more about the R1 universities now that are really understanding that the liberal arts depth and breadth has to be combined with practice. So all of those universities do more and more to make sure that people are learning by doing, so that when they emerge, they haven't just studied biology, they actually know what it means to create experiments, build companies, do the things that come as a result of that training. And then finally, I think we're doing a much better job at preparing people, or need to do a better job in giving them the technical skills. Not just coding, but all the technical skills that are necessary in these rapidly developing markets.
And one of the major concerns kind of with giving them some more of those technical skills and developing them is the cost that's associated with doing that. Kind of as we think about this kind of college affordability crisis, we were at $1.5 trillion in student debt. What are some of the things that UNC is doing to make tuition and the cost of college more affordable? And then how can other universities and lawmakers be thinking about transforming that to make that training more affordable?
I think that's a question. I'm going to beg your indulgence to talk a little bit about UNC Chapel Hill for the start of that, because I think we actually do have a unique model. It's the first public university in America, and when it was chartered to be as inexpensive as practicable. So we have had low tuition in our entire history. But we've had support from the state. So they still have supported us to keep tuition low. As that support has gone down, we've been struggling to keep tuition low, but that's part of our DNA. And the model there is keep tuition low and get graduation rates high. So our 6-year graduation rates are almost 92%. So what we say to the state is we're going to continue to give excellence and graduation if you continue to invest in us. I think the other way that you'll see our university and others doing is concentrating in areas. So we have programs for the lowest income students. For us, any student 2 standard deviations below the poverty level will graduate without debt. And that's $26,000 a year salary for the family, and they graduate without debt. And that's almost 14% of our population. So a lot of financial aid and support at low income, trying to keep the debts low. So our debt at graduation is less, it's about $20,000. So skin in the game, but it doesn't end you. But more partnerships with community colleges, more partnerships all the way down into high school to help students be ready, because I believe very strongly that to get people there is important, but what's really critical is we get them to graduate. Because it doesn't help to get people there and not graduate them. So I think you need to focus a lot of the efforts that once they're there, you make sure you're doing everything to get them to graduate.
And some of those programs that you're talking about, do you think that those are kind of scalable to not only other R1s, but to the regional public institutions where I know North Carolina started the NC Promise program with three of the institutions, but is that possible to scale to the rest of the state, and can state lawmakers in other countries kind of do a similar thing?
You know, I think it really takes a good look at it, but I think some of the ways that states are investing are not as likely to be successful as if they're developing a portfolio. So for example, we start in the high school, we put advisors in the high school, and in a simple high school, if you add an advisor that somebody else pays for, these are the poorest schools in the country, and they start helping people go to college, you'll see applications go from 30 to 87%, and you'll get them into financial aid packages. So you have to start there, and that is not very expensive. Then you have to get into the community college and say, if you do well in those next 2 years, we're going to get you financial aid, and you can complete a 4-year degree. And then you have to keep tuition low. I think the problem is when you think there's a single solution, because what there really needs is that multiple approaches.
So let's talk for a second about the role of kind of diversity in all of this. The workplace is becoming, of course, an increasingly diverse place, and I know that you've recently kind of dealt with kind of issues of building a kind of equitable, inviting environment for students, kind of with the Silent Sam issue. So I guess, what role do those sorts of debates and kind of fostering an environment where students can have those sort of debates, what role does that play in preparation for the workforce of the future?
Oh, that's such a good question. You know, if you ask people what they were doing 25, 30 years ago, a lot of them were protesting something. You know, so I tend to believe that students that want to protest are not a problem for us. What's a problem is when these get out of scale, when they become violent, when you protest without listening. You know, so those are all the learning parts. But the idea that the people that come to a university suddenly open their eyes to things they've never seen before and they want to have a say is exactly what we want. So I think we're in that balance to say that to disagree is fine. And in fact, in all your businesses, you do not want everybody sitting at the table that agrees with each other. You'll get no good products. You'll build yesterday's product. So I think we need to find a way to have that, I call it the open space of democracy, be a place that can really work. And I think we've seen extremes that have really made it seem like it can't happen, that no one will ever listen to each other. But I'll just give you an example that I think would give you hope. At my university, and I think this is true for many, there is a rising voice from students that want to go back to the principles of debate. They want to see panels that have two sides of every argument. Now, when my students are the ones that are leading that, I say, keep your hope open, because that's what they want. So these are cycles that affect universities, and we deal with them, but they really need to be part of it, because any university that has nobody protesting, you probably wonder, why? You know, what's wrong there? What can we do? Not that you want to have too many, but it's true. It's really a part of it.
Yeah, kind of the productivity of disagreement.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You came to UNC Chapel Hill from Dartmouth, and there's kind of, as you mentioned a little bit earlier, there's a difference. When we kind of think of higher education, there's a tendency to paint it with a broad brush, but there is a difference between kind of public higher education, private higher education, for-profit higher education, non-for-profit higher education. How different is the mission of a public university, particularly the flagship university in a state? How different is that mission from a private university, and how does that change how you're thinking about your university as a chancellor?
I believe that if you're a low-income student or a wealthy student, there should be no different in your opportunity. And in fact, I don't think students should go to the wealthiest colleges to have good experiences and have some conveyor belt experience at the schools without resources. My entire focus has been excellence at any level of income. And I think what's really exciting to me now is that scaling. We don't want students to not have opportunities to have internships because they can't afford to go to a wealthy school. We don't want students not able to understand a global mindset because they couldn't go to a school that is considered an elite school. Our job is to make sure that every student has those excellent opportunities. And I see great examples of how they are scaled and can be really brought in to public education. You know, public education is 70% of our students, it's 70% of our research. If it's second-class education, that is not good for America. So our goal is to make public education first-class education.
And this conversation of making college affordable and making kind of public education you know, a first-class education for the widest array of people. There tends to be a class that gets left out of a conversation. I know a lot of it centers around low-income students, but there's also kind of this intermediate threshold where you make too much money to receive a Pell Grant, but you also don't make enough money to actually pay for your child to go to college. So what is UNC doing for kind of that tier of student that just falls below or above that threshold and below that threshold?
It's a really good question. So we have this covenant program for 2 standard deviations below poverty, but what about 1.5 standard deviations below poverty, or just 1 standard deviation above? That is actually the majority of our students fall in that. So we do need blind, and we meet full need with financial aid. We've just added a new program specifically targeting those students that will aim to keep all debt below $10,000 so they can graduate with that debt with a combination of work study. And so I think that is a really important group. And I think what's important in all of these is not simply do they get their tuition paid, but can they take advantage of an internship? Can they study abroad? Can they afford to buy their art supplies? Can they go to the coding camps? You know, it is that really big question of getting rid of the gaps, not only in achievement, but in true experience. And so I think that's where we're starting to see a lot happening. That's where businesses can be enormously helpful. They can help give those add-on experiences that are absolutely needed to take a student from a graduate to a highly sought-after member of the market. And so I think we're going to see more public-private partnerships as we try to really build up those opportunities so that all students are getting that same access.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. Is there a future that you can imagine where the majority of students in the United States graduate from college with little to no debt? And if so, what does that future look like?
Well, I mean, I wish everybody could be a model for, or UNC could be a model for everyone, but they can't be because we also have this long history, we have a big endowment, we get $1 billion in research because we have among the best researchers in the world. So I think you're going to see different categories of what they contribute, but I think for the undergraduate student, keeping that debt is important, but only if we couple it with graduation. I think if students graduate, the data really show, not the really high debt, but students that graduate with a reasonable debt, pay it back. They do not default. So I think there's the missing piece is don't keep the debt down and see low graduation. So some of the very low tuitions have not scaled with any graduation rate. They can have less than 25% graduation rate. So I'm not sure that's a good return on investment by the public. I think coupling that return on investment with graduation, and then even more as they progress through their lives, not just focusing on your first job out, but how are they maintaining the workforce that makes this the country that can stay the most competitive. So I think those all need to be considered together. But I think you'll see more schools, even like Chapel Hill, having a greater number of our students getting their degrees while not being on campus, while working, while out of the country doing things. You'll see a change in who is the normal student already happening. You'll see that too.
So we have a microphone in the back if anyone has questions. We have one here.
Oh, Jason Cox, Alex Partners. Do you think there is a model, a European-style model that could work in this country of earlier vocational tracking for children and kind of an apprenticeship model rather than sending as many people as we do to college?
I don't tend to think that's the most successful model. I think there are opportunities that we should be doing that. All of our students should be getting a great chance. But when I look like where is the great innovation coming in the world, it is not coming from those systems. It's coming from ours, where we give chances for students to come in at different times. And even in Europe and in Australia, you're seeing a lot of pushback. Students don't want to be targeted into a certain track at a certain age and never feel they could jump and change tracks. So I think those things have real merits and we should be open-minded to them. But I think to think that a student at 14 or 12 knows what they want to be at 40, especially when 3 out of 5 jobs that are going to be available when they're 40 don't even exist yet, would be a pretty bad continuation of attainment gaps. And I don't think that really leads to the best, most productive future. But we still have to think about ways to give people opportunities that want that kind of training.
We have one here.
Just say your name. Yeah, hi. Hi, Ruby Lerner, and I'm at Chapel Hill. Hi, Carol. I'm really interested in this idea of lifelong learning. So how do you think about a relationship with a student who comes in? How do you think about a relationship with them 20 years after they've graduated, 30 years after they've graduated?
Ruby's bringing up such an important point. If you went back just 20 years, universities were responsible from about 18 to 22, and then the higher ones went on to doctors, lawyers, and PhDs. Now, we're already well done into K through 12 and considered quite responsible, and we're stretching cradle to grave. And that is really important, and we have to embrace that. Those students won't all be part of the residential life, but they're going to need a blended learning opportunity because these 3 out of 5 jobs that have not yet been created are going to need a workforce and people able to do them. So we're already seeing it. It'll be a little bit like, I think at the start, the executive model that many business schools do. You become an alumni for life, and you have an opportunity at your university or others for an inexpensive way to keep refreshing. It would probably be, we have the largest and one of the first and best online MBA programs. Students in those programs are working in their jobs, they meet in areas, they have time together, and then they go back and they work like heck, and they get a next advanced degree, and they start even ahead of everyone else in the workforce. So we'll see more of those blended opportunities, but I really think it's cradle to grave. So your best universities and the ones that want to keep in touch with their alums or serve their states have to open up those postgraduate opportunities using digital learning models and blended learning. And I think it's really exciting. Good models are not really that common yet. A lot of those are not really doing well, but we'll get there. This is just the start of all that.
A hand here.
Yeah, hi.
This microphone right behind you.
Okay, so my name is Al Doyle. I'm a college professor. I teach game design at Touro College here in Manhattan. We're getting competition from non-traditional boot camps. And the disruption for universities everywhere caused by General Assembly, Flatiron School, especially us in my department, which is the technology department, is really critical to our survival. How do we compete with the boot camps?
I think this is really a critical issue for all universities and at every level. I mean, competition, if you really think about it, actually has been our bread and butter. We compete all the time. We've got talent forces. So what we cannot do is get frightened and get in a mode that says, stop competition. I think we have to go back and go, wait a minute, we're not afraid of competition. We want to really find out what it is that we can do, find our own sector, do it really well. But we do have gross inefficiencies in the way we run. I think we all know that. We've got bureaucracies that make these learning environments, which should be the fastest to grow and change, the slowest. So I think it's quite a bit on us to do everything we can to do that, and I think it's on us to also own that competition is not something we're afraid of, and in fact, we want to embrace it. That doesn't make it easy when you're sitting looking in a department with a budget going down and being told that you're not valued. So I understand that, but I think if we can turn our mind towards that positive, that 5 years out, it helps us realize that we are a fundamental part of the solution, but we have to do our job to do it better, I think, and embrace that. And I see it happening all over the place, but it's not, it's not universal yet.
This has been a great conversation, and if everyone can join me in thanking Chancellor Folt for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Adam. Really appreciate it.